Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's your host, John Scardina. I am so excited for this episode. I say that every single week because every single week I have somebody great coming onto the show. This episode in particular is kind of a special episode for us. Not only are we going to be talking about East Palestine, as the title will reveal, but this is timely, right? This is what we're talking about. But interestingly enough, we have been on almost like a hazmat kick here for a while now. As you recall, about a month and a half ago, I was at the Hazmat Symposium. I had the president on there, Chief Jonathan Lamb. I had Michelle and Cy also on there as a panel. We were talking about hazmat from the perspective of both the hazmat responder as well as emergency manager, what they can do. We had, and if you're watching the screen here, Dr. Ali, who wrote Walk Through Fire, just on this podcast last week, talking about the Waverly train disaster. I've talked about, I had an episode just a couple weeks ago about building a next level sit rep and what to do and how to track incidents. We've really been on this this thought process here for a while to help emergency managers get up to speed. And not funny enough, after doing a lot of those episodes, we recorded those in January, and then East Palestine, Ohio happens, and all of a sudden, here we are. And I thought it was only appropriate to kind of change our schedule a little bit and say, hey, let me bring on an expert here, a hazmat expert who's been on the show before and can speak competently to kind of the process here from an emergency planning, a response perspective, maybe even a recovery perspective. He's been all over the globe. He is one of my great friends and truly an expert in hazmat response experiences. Eric Helpenstell, I want to introduce him to the show right now. Eric, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me on, John. It's good to see you again.
And just for like the sake of everybody, for your credit, I texted you and I said, hey, what do you know about this? Can you help me out? We want to do this on short notice. And so thanks again for making the time for us and to really help the field of emergency management learn more about, appropriate actions from an expert perspective.
I appreciate that. Just so you know, I haven't been on site in Ohio on this incident, but I've talked to a few of my colleagues that have been, and I'm pretty well up to speed with what I can talk about.
Well, I haven't been to every tornado in the world, but
Certainly.
If somebody asks me what happens at a tornado, I can tell them what happens. So,
Yeah.
And you really have the chops. Well, last time that we talked about hazmat, I think you were in Italy in a.
I was in Georgia working on the Golden Ray.
No. Between the podcasts, there was an incident you're telling me about in Italy, right? Like you really do go over the place, or your company goes all over the place and helps out with these hazmat cleanups, right?
Yeah, that was a refinery incident. Fire after shutdown of a chemical refinery.
That's wild. You are not so secretly, because of this podcast, probably the most interesting man in the world for everywhere you go and the amount of things that you've done and helped out. We've talked about Exxon Valdez incident before. I'm sure we'll talk about that again in this episode. But just for the sake of trying to form the conversation to help what's happening, we've all been watching from afar. A lot of us have a lot of questions from both a hazmat and an EM hat, putting those different hats on. Can you explain to us what happened in East Palestine with the train disaster and kind of just walk through the incident for us?
Sure. As you know, we have to move chemicals and materials and everything in everyday life around the country. It has to get from where it's either produced to where it's going to the end user. Might have to get moved from the Gulf of Mexico off of a tanker to a refinery in Ohio to the plant that makes the finished product in Oregon. So every day we have materials in motion, whether it's by truck, whether it's by barge on the rivers or along the coast, tankers going internationally, trains, and in this case, a train of 149 cars, a Norfolk Southern train in Ohio, clacking along doing this thing every day that a train does, experience a derailment. And I think 38 of the 149 cars derailed, what they call decoupled, ended up just like pixie sticks stacking up right on the train tracks or wherever the gravity takes them at that point.
Pause for this week's Disaster Tough endorsements. How do you spell Doberman Emergency Management? EOP, OEP, HVA, HMP, Thyra, TTX, Drone, PDA. Whenever you need an expert, Doberman Emergency Management field experts are there for support. Contact an expert at DobermanEMG.com today. The L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio solves problems and is specifically designed for emergency services. How do we know? We field tested it with medical, urban search and rescue, and collapse and confined structures. This radio is amazingly tough. Check out the L3 Harris Extreme 400P radio at l3harris.com right now. Instinct Ready kits are awesome, compact, fully loaded, and easy to place around your office, school, campus, warehouse, wherever. I keep a quick pack in my vehicle and one at home. Imagine Instinct Ready fully loaded Stop the Bleed kits in every school and office. Get Instinct Ready kits and training at instinctready.com. Okay, let's jump back in. Yeah, pretty rough. I mean, I wouldn't even know, like, when you show up, it's like, okay, like, what now? And because of the book that I just read, Walk Through Fire, now I kind of have a general idea. But let's say that just in general, right? Like the train derails.
Mm-hmm.
What are actions, step 1, 2, and 3, to make sure that people are not impacted by that train derailment?
Sure. Well, let's back up just a second and talk about the train itself, about the safety measures they have in place and how some of the instruments they use. So,
sure.
Back in the day, 50, 60 years ago, a train track was literally just that. It was gravel, it was rail ties, and it was rail on top of it. There wasn't a whole lot of technology to go with that. As incidents happen, reactive nature that we are in America, we build better and better systems to prevent this from happening. One of the things that leads to common train derailments is bearing failure. That's where the wheels are turning, holding up that 60, 50, 60, 70 ton load. They put sensors every few thousand yards or even just a mile or two apart on the tracks. It's called an HBD, which is a hot box detector. That's literally looking at the temperature of the box it goes by. In range. Another one is the HWD sensors. It's looking at the hot wheel detector. It's literally looking at the bearings, scanning it, hundreds of times, thousands of times a second as it rolls by, counting them so it knows which car it is, and it's literally looking at the temperature of the bearings and the wheels. It knows that at this point of this section of track, 99% of the trains, this is the wheel temperature. We know what's range. If it's going uphill, it's going to be a little cooler because no brakes are being applied. Going downhill, it might be a little warmer. So they have these tens of millions of data points of these wheels rolling over these things every day, telling them what is in range and what is not. In the East Palestine incident, the hot wheel detector had detected the train was something's awry. They stopped the train too late. It was already derailed, and here we are dealing with the mess we're at.
Yeah. So, like, it wasn't the track; it was the bearings.
That's what it's looking like. I'm looking at the on my other screen here. This morning, NTSB just came out with their preliminary report. It's only a 4-pager, and it's literally just a who, what, when, why, what. It doesn't say why. It just tells you the temperature at this such and such point was this. 3 minutes later, the train is on the ground.
Are those reports publicly available?
They are. You have to do a search for it because it's only 4 hours old, 5 hours old. And I'll forward the link for that offline here in a minute.
Maybe we can put it in the show description for those who are waiting to learn more about that. But I think of almost funny enough, like my brain goes back to river gauges, and we're watching the stages of river, and we can tell how much flooding, what's going to happen based off of these river gauges, and we can make plans and assessments based off of the heights there. Obviously the reason that they have these sensors is because they want to see if the train is going to derail and what causes that. What are some of the other reasons for like putting those sensors in? Like, do you know of any instance, and you might not, and that's totally fine. Do you know of any incidents where like, okay, this is out of range, and so they get the train to stop immediately? Have they ever prevented a derailment based off of that range data?
Absolutely. They're not going to publish the numbers, but talking to my maintenance friends at Norfolk Southern at Union Pacific, they tell me this happens hundreds of times a quarter. Well, the operator will get a notification over temperature. He will immediately stop the train and deal with the issue. Whether that could be as simple as just stopping the train and going to verify it by hand. Ground truth it with this little laser temperature. If there's indeed a fire, as you know, you catch a fire at the incipient stage. It's easier to put out than when it's roaring. And a train rolling along the track at 55 miles an hour plus is going to have a lot of wind blowing that fire. So they have definite stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Stage 1 is slow down. Stage 2 is stop and verify. Stage 3 is take immediate critical action.
Yeah, funny enough, I heard a talk one time, like a presentation, and somebody said it was explaining thought process, and he said what do you, Richard G. Scott, he said, what do you do when you see a child run in front of your car?
Yeah.
And most people say stop. He said, no, you take your foot off the gas, then you put your foot on the brake, and then you swerve out of the way. Like you do, like there is a process
Yeah.
to all of this. And I don't think people realize that. Like there's things to play. Like, yes, rail derailments are the worst,
Yeah.
and communities are impacted. But two, some articles, some headlines make it sound like it's black and white, like they
Yeah.
either do everything or they've done nothing. But as you just called out, there's a lot of things in place, and unfortunately, there's still a derailment, right? Like Murphy's law is real.
Certainly.
So most likely it was caused from that issue, right? We have a lot more to learn. When it tips over, I thought they did a controlled burn because they were afraid of it exploding. Is that correct? Like, what was the
Yeah.
process
So
immediately
I'm
after?
looking. I've got down on the manifest of what was the 38 cars that are
Cool.
derailed, and I'm looking at things like vinyl chloride stabilized, propylene glycol, which antifreeze, diethylene glycol, polyethylene beads. It goes on and on. All this stuff is used in manufacturing of something around the country somewhere.
Yeah.
These 5 cars in particular, the vinyl chloride is used to manufacture PVC. All the PVC pipes you see, or some
Mm.
of the plastic type furniture you see in your backyards.
Yeah.
Stuff is shipped as a liquid. It's a gas, normally a gas at atmospheric pressure, but you can compress it really easily and turn it into a liquid, and it's shipped in these cars wherever it needs to go.
Mm.
Extremely combustible. It burns really good, and it builds up pressure. These train cars are built to a specification that will prevent the pressure buildup by flaring off, but
Mm.
that's incumbent on the car being upright. Once the car is on its side, the vent is no longer exposed to free atmosphere, free
Uh-huh.
space inside the tank, so it's got liquid pushed up against it. Well, to prevent the contents spilling out, what do? You put a ball in the uh, pressure vent that will plug the valve if there is a rollover. That prevents that prevents other problems. Prevents the whatever contents are from spilling out and leaking all over the place. Because now you're trading one evil for another. But now you throw the other element of fire. Let's throw some fire in there for the mix. Car's on its side; it can't vent pressure. The vent is plugged, so it can't drain the pressure. Fire is impinging on the material. You've got all that free metal space that's just acting as a heater, heating up the contents. Contents are getting hot; they're expanding, building up pressure. Um, that's no bueno. You don't want what's called a blevy, boiling liquid, expanding vapor explosion.
Mm.
Makes for a fantastic effect in the middle of the desert when you're watching it, but as an example or demonstration. But in an occupied area, you don't want five rail cars of volatile liquids reaching vapor point, being held back by a steel container, just to be unleashed, instantly vaporizing itself, catching fire, and blowing the smithereens out of what's in that end of the town.
So before we get into like the specifics of this
Yeah,
one, from a general perspective, we're almost going to start the end and work our way backwards here.
sure.
There's like, what's that clip from oh my gosh, Good Guys, where he's being
Yeah, yeah.
interrogated and he's like, first you start at the end, then you go back to the beginning. Well, we're gonna do one of those.
Okay,
In terms of your expertise, your knowledge of hazmat incidents,
sure.
if you were essentially there, would you have done it the same way? Did you think that they were within the scope of prudence, or would you say, hey, for whatever reason, right? It could be
Sure.
something as terrible as intentional to negligence to just a lack of knowledge. Is the criticism about the incident within scope, or you say, you know what, in terms of response and mitigating other disasters, were they within scope?
Sure. It's hard to second guess the fire chiefs and the responsible parties' actions until after the fact. It's easy to criticize that way.
Yeah.
But knowing that these guys are career professionals, knowing what they have in hand, the information in front of them, I'm sure they chose the path of the not the least resistance, but the lesser of the two evils.
Yeah.
What do I put guys up front? Do I try to fight this fire, knowing that if it does explode, it's going to kill how many people? Do we get automated equipment? Do we get the robotic water cannons? Those are available, but how far out are they? Can you get them in time? So you have to stack all these the resources that are available. What do I have? Risk a little to save a little, risk a lot to save a lot. Oftentimes, there's not much you can do.
Well, I will say that as far as I know, and I could be wrong, nobody was immediately impacted by the train derailment. Nobody was like
No.
hit by explosion. And comparing it to, again, this book that I just read, they did lose like half of their responders. The fire chief, his life was lost. They lost
Yeah.
other firefighters. They lost, I believe, police officers, townspeople. And from that immediate trauma perspective, thank goodness that nobody died from this incident. Um, from an emergency management standpoint, from the coordination standpoint, um, from an outsider, it feels like the response was slower than it should have been. But I always know it's more complex than that, right? Like
Yeah.
we always try to
Yeah.
like dilute it down to like, oh, black and white, but it's not. And trying to understand that. So from uh, East Palestine perspective, I guess the question I have is the two questions of the response. What should happen in a response from an educational perspective if
Sure.
this happens again? What should we do? And then the other part of that is like so what? Like so what to East Palestine? What should East Palestine do now? Because those
Yeah.
might be two different things. So the first one,
Sure.
I guess, like if somebody has a train derailment, there's been a lot of hazmat incidents in the last couple of days. What would your advice be from an emergency management coordination perspective? What needs to happen in order to maximize success?
Sure. So the first thing I'm always worried about is the people. Make sure the people are safe. After the people are safe, we can start attacking the situation, and that is knowing what's on it. You have to have a manifest because a train can haul anything or nothing. Every one of those cars could be absolutely empty and clean or brand new, or it could be hauling the most volatile of chemicals or poisons. It could be hauling it's literally be hauling cases of explosives. So getting the manifest on any incident and knowing what you're dealing with is the first step.
Do you think a local emergency manager has that level of knowledge of even to like think of I need to get the manifest?
Everybody talks about well, why didn't they know about this? Why didn't they know about this? One of the reasons they don't, whether it's communicated or not to the local areas, there's somebody that knows in the local area what's coming through,
Mm,
but this stuff is so dynamic and constantly changing. What's coming through this morning is not going to be the same at lunchtime. It's not going to be the same time at dinner time.
mm.
Delays happen. Sometimes freight is rerouted. The train that was expected at noon is no longer coming because now it's taking a southern route to avoid congestion, track maintenance, any issues. So unless
Is
you have
there
unless you have somebody full time watching these reports, you would never know what's coming to your area. Another issue is you don't want to disseminate this stuff publicly. You can't have it on an open faced website because that just makes it a target of opportunity.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow up about the security of it. Like,
Yeah,
not only does an emergency, like when I think of local emergency management, personnel, and no discredit to them, when you're a team of one in a
yeah,
rural county,
you got it.
and someone says, "Why didn't you think about the manifest?" I don't know. I didn't even know what number to call, like from the rail.
Yeah,
Like sometimes they don't know what the starting point is, and there's an education piece to that. It's like,
sure.
okay, if we all make believe that we're experts in all hazards, right? This is a hazard that they need to be aware of, sure, but and it just turns of like the knowledge base of like who that makes the connections. But I do wonder about the security of that. Is the security issue justified? I mean, like the crimes of opportunity are there, sure, and there's definitely
Yeah,
chemicals on there. I wonder, like, I wonder if somebody knows what's on there, if they will actually be able to act on it.
sure. Well, the one person that always knows what is on the train is the conductor himself and the engineers. You're
Mm,
always going to have that list up front. So even if the local EM doesn't have it at the county office, the fire chief knows to get to the front car. That's where the list of what's going to be on there. So
perfect.
one
So
of the
step one, get to the conductor, right? Get
get
the
to the
manifest
conductor.
from the
Yeah,
conductor.
we've already addressed life safety. There's going to be people out there. If there's fire involved, you know to evacuate. Firefighters know what to do. They just initially show up in an incident. They know, barring everything else, I need to get people out of the way. I need to start doing structure protection. I need to start doing this and that until
Mm,
something says, "Hey, man, this I got orange smoke. I've got purple flames. This something is different here." A fire is a fire until it's not, and the firefighters know what to look for,
mm,
knowing that this is not right. This is not a run of the mill incident that I'm showing up. It's not a structure fire with black smoke and the furniture's burning, the house is fully involved. We can deal with that. We do that hundreds of times in our career. It's just when you throw the complete randomness of what a train is made up of, and the individual cars is now mixed, that
Yeah.
becomes issues. But knowing
So,
that, there's always going to be that list up front that the responsible party can give to the first on scene, the first incident commander.
all right. So you're volunteer fire chief.
Yeah.
You have this emergency manager. You guys get to the front of the car. I'm just walking through the whole thing just because I'm hyper curious. You can talk to the conductor. He says, "Hey, it's some really bad stuff on here. Here's the manifest. You got to get people out of here." Right?
Yeah.
What is the immediate next step? Is it evacuations? Is it determining the scope of evacuations? And then, like, my logical thought is figure out who evacuates, communicate with those who need to evacuate, alert everybody else within a wider range. Is that roughly correct, or is that incorrect?
Well, to a point. I mean, life safety being what it is, the firefighters on site are going to begin their assessments. One problem with the train is the incident might be back here, but the engine's going to be a mile and a half ahead, depending on where the derailment is. If I'm reading the numbers right, the engine's decoupled and went down the track a mile. So,
oh, geez.
Yeah. So
they went down a mile after they decoupled?
After they decoupled, because they don't want the rest of those cars that are affected to become part of the problem. So SOP is to brake where you can. You've derailed. There's nothing you can do about that. You can't pull them back on the track and fix it. Decouple where it's safe and then move what you can out of the way.
I mean, that makes sense, right? That's consequence management, right? Get the rest of the stuff out of the way.
Certainly. So you got to find the right train tracks, because sometimes they split in towns or hit a rail yard, and where's the conductor? Where's my engineer at? So they're not going to be hard to find. They're going to be making calls to you as well.
Yeah, I bet. Trying to get all that figured out. Okay, so what's next in that stop process? And in terms of East Palestine, do we actually know what happened next because there was a moment of time between the release, the controlled release.
Sure.
I think it was like 48 hours, right?
I think so. It was 2 days. I think they didn't do the release until the 5th.
The 5th, yeah. Which, again, timing. 45 years ago, this train disaster that changed everything in a small town. Now you have and I'm from Ohio, so when people talk about East Palestine, Ohio, I've been to East Palestine, Ohio, or at least been through it. There really isn't much there, and maybe less likely now. That 48-hour period, they're obviously not relying on hope. What is going on during that? What actually went on during those 48 hours that you could assess would have happened?
Sure. Let's take you back about 7 years to the Mosier, Oregon, Union Pacific derailment that I worked on. That was my last derailment with a fire that we worked. At the height of the pipeline controversy, whether we build this pipeline through the Dakotas or not, the Keystone Pipeline.
Yeah.
This oil was still moving. It's just not going through a pipeline. It's going on oil trains, which dozens of those a day are coming out. Train, as we talked about offline, you take a small risk and multiply it by thousands of evolutions, even tens or hundreds of thousands. That small ratio becomes bigger. Well, it happened in Mosier, Oregon. Union Pacific train derailed, decoupled. The cars started burning of semi-refined product and some crude oils. Local department, there's nothing they could do. It's a volunteer department, maybe a couple, half a dozen paid staff. What are they going to do with their couple of Pierce fire engines? Not much. So we had their initial response was to stop traffic on Highway 84, get the people out of the way, and call Portland. Their next operations. They had airplane crash trucks from the Portland airport come to help put this fire out and work this fire, contain it. Decision was made at that point. We can't contain this. We're going to let it burn. All the cars have breached. There's no chance of them to bloody or to explode. At this point, it's right next to the Columbia River. That decision was made to let it burn. That was the least of the bad options. Let it burn, and then we deal with the mess after. East Palestine, I don't know the size of their department, but they may have the similar problems. Like you mentioned, they could have all volunteer department. What kind of resources are you getting? One thing I do know is that for Norfolk Southern to ship any product on any of their rail lines, they have to have pre-established plans. You work planning in your career. That there's shelves of these things sitting around that if the train derails here, these are our response contractors. If it derails here, here's our set of response contractors. We have a pre-established org chart of who's incident commander this month, or this week, or this quarter. for any incident. It just trickles down from there. A lot of times, though, these things happen right at the cusp of the point or wherever it's at that you're furthest ways you could possibly from contractor A and contractor B trying to get these resources there. So,
yeah. Again,
no matter,
Murphy's Law.
Yeah, no matter. The family and I used to talk about moving, but I was like, where do we move for my career? Because no matter where I move, I'm never gonna be working in my backyard unless I'm at home preparing or winding down from an incident. So no matter what happens, it's gonna be somewhere else. So no matter where you have your equipment, your personnel, your contractors for response, it's going to be somewhere else.
I highly suggest and recommend that you move to St. Louis, Missouri, because
I hear good things.
Yeah, good thing. There's a really cool family here with 2 little kids and awesome wife. Yeah, in terms of you bring up this because you brought this up in our last episode, it makes me want to come full circle with it. Trains versus pipes.
Yeah. Pipes are pipes. Once installed, a pipeline is by far the safest way to move any product. That pipeline that runs from Anacortes, Washington, down south through Central Oregon, it pumps diesel. It can pump diesel in the morning, unleaded gasoline in the afternoon, road tar on a Tuesday. It could be pumping all kinds of products, kerosene. And once installed, that pipeline can operate for decades or more, and unless disturbed. It's only when you disturb something that things happen. That refinery fire we talked about in Italy, a refinery will run for months, years, multiple years without any issue until you try to change it. Until you want to change the state of it, it's just happily chugging away, heating oil, making whatever. It's not until you try to stop it, do maintenance on something, or something else changes. You want to make different products, you have to retool. That's when things happen. The shutdown and startup of a refinery is 90% of the incidents. Same thing with a pipeline. It's happily chugging away. Once installed, it is by far the safest way. The second is by marine transport, oil tankers, barges up and down the rivers. That's the second way. Third most efficient and safe way to move products is by train. Fourth is overland truck. And the least safe way is just by bucket. Literally, a lot of places still move products by bucket over hills and mountains, like in Nepal. I was there a couple months ago with a daughter. You literally see guys carrying the 5 and 10 gallon kerosene jugs on their shoulders, 5-gallon buckets of kerosene.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So,
but when it does go wrong, it goes horribly wrong. Eggs on Valdez. The Olympic pipeline explosion. The pipeline was disturbed. It leaked. I don't know how many tens of thousands of gallons of gasoline into a river valley. The fumes flowed downhill, found an ignition source, and unfortunately killed 4 kids that were playing in the valley. That pipeline had been moving tens of thousands of gallons an hour for years at that point. When that shut down, they had to ship the fuel to Portland, Oregon, to the airport by truck. That put another 1,000 trucks a day on the highways. You can do the math there from Bellingham, Washington to Portland of how many millions of miles a week that is of additional exposure.
Well, and you know him too because we were in the same Georgetown program. Yeah. Dr. Johnson, who's been on the podcast a couple times, he talks about how the nuclear, nuclear plants, it would basically solve everybody's problems. The energy of it, it's clean, it's good for the environment, blah blah blah. But people freak out because when something does happen, it's catastrophic. But it's also catastrophic for that one area, and not to minimize the impact of environment and people and other things. But it is exponentially better in terms of that perspective, and yet there's a lot of pushback. So people are actually opting for more dangerous options because it's maybe what they know. If you're going to play devil's advocate, you're a pretty smart guy, and you and I both agree pipelines are the absolutely best. And then walking down the thing, why are people pushing away from, again, Steve Johnson, nuclear power plants or pipelines, that kind of stuff? Why do they push back on that?
I think a lot of it comes down to NIMBY, not in my backyard. Nobody wants to. For the Keystone Pipeline, it was all of the issues with the native population there and the grounds that they wanted to cross. There's no cheap route. You need right-of-ways that can take a decade or more to procure and get an undisturbed path from point A to point B. You have the construction costs. You have the construction disruptions that can often take years. So until the pipeline's put in, it's a huge disruption. But once it's in, it's going to be a sign along the side of the road: do not dig here. Call before digging. It's going to be a clear right away through the trees. That's you would know the difference.
I thought pipelines were above ground.
A lot of them are, depending on where you're at. Like the pipeline in Alaska, the northernmost of it is above ground to prevent permafrost from sinking into the ground from the heat. Southern half is above. It's a mix above and below ground.
But it can go below ground. Yeah. So that's pretty fascinating to think about. So okay.
I know it's kind of a boring topic, but pull up on Google.
It is not a boring topic.
Yeah.
Everybody's focused on this right now, and you are the most interesting man in the world. So
pull up the map on Google of underground pipelines in America, and it's just a massive web of pipes. And these products can be pumped from the Gulf of Mexico to California, the Gulf of Mexico to New Jersey, get refined into a product and pumped to Ohio. Some are large, some are small, some are feeders, some are just tributaries. It's incredible.
Is that one of the options that people will most likely discuss after East Palestine? Is like, should we move this over to pipelines, or is that not really within scope based off of the chemicals that were?
So these the PVC precursors, you won't be able to ship those in a pipeline because you just can't ship them in a pipe. Not like that.
Okay.
It would just plug the pipe.
It would plug the pipe.
Yeah.
You'd make PVC pipes into more PVC pipes.
You got it. Absolutely. This the vinyl chloride stabilized. It's only stable until you start messing with it. It can undergo spontaneous polymerization, which creates a lot of heat. So there's other issues. You can't ship it in a pipeline. You're going to create issues.
Okay, so presumably, they clean this up. There's still a rail line, still millions of cars every day. Let's move over to kind of that second half of the question, which was, now what? So what for East Palestine? What is East Palestine actually going to do? Because there's a very famous, and it is pretty jarring to see this image of them blowing up in the plume and the environmental impacts and everything.
Yeah.
I did offline talk to, and this is for the kind of the audience sake, talk to engineers about how they can actually clean up the water. There are processes like a carbonated charcoal, I believe, stuff like that. And I could be wrong, but like what actually now happens? You've been at these massive cleanups.
Absolutely.
How does East Palestine move forward? If I'm a homeowner, I would be nervous because I'm like, oh, my home value, can I move? Can I do this? And they're poor. Like a lot of people are poor in that area.
Absolutely.
So what now?
As you know, money gets the representation, and representation gets the actions from governments. And when you're underrepresented, like a poor economic area, you're not going to get the attention you need unless you get an incident like this happening. For East Palestine to move forward, they're going to have to drill hundreds of bore sample or test wells. They're going to have to monitor those, figure out where this plume of whatever they put underground is. One of the products I was looking on here is petroleum diethylene glycol, propylene glycol. Both of those are miscible in water, which means you're just going to dissolve right into the water table. When I show up in an oil spill, whether it's Alaskan crude or used engine oil, they don't mix with water well. So it's going to end up on the shore. It's going to float on top of the oil unless there's odd oils that sink, but that's a separate problem, and that's the flyer. But oil doesn't mix with water well. We have mechanical separation. You can literally centrifuge it. You can use weirs to suck it out of the water. You can literally use vacuums and suck it out of the water. We have all kinds of ways. If you dump it on the ground, it usually doesn't sink far because it's still going to float on top of the water table. So you can just keep on scooping it up with a Frenum loader till you don't reach any more oil. A lot of these products on this train, and one of the problems with any train is the products can be anything. A lot of the stuff is just going to go right in the ground table, and it's going to sink down because it is lighter than water or immiscible.
So if it is sinking to the ground, if it is doing these things that you're saying, they're drilling hundreds of wells to figure out like what's going to happen. As if I'm living there, what are the priorities from response recovery perspective to help individuals? Like what should be happening? Honestly, might not, but what should be happening with those people? Should they be permanently evacuated until the water table is clean? Are they going to do like boil orders? Is it like a Flint, Michigan thing? Like
Yeah.
what is appropriate action for them based off of that manifest chemicals, that were impacting their lives?
Well, in an ideal world, the responsible party would return it to as close to precondition as possible. You
Is
know,
that what's going to happen here?
that's what's going to happen on paper, but in actual practice, what you do with a checkbook, there's only so much you can do. There's literally there's only so much equipment you can get on a site and so much earth you can excavate, but you're just chasing, without monitoring and knowing what you've got. That's the first step. So I mean, it'd be premature for me to say what they should do or shouldn't do.
Okay, so in this last part, because I know people are going to be asking about why didn't you ask about that? So
Yeah.
I kind of kicked this up before we started. There's criticism about specifically the federal response and maybe even the state response perspective. It looks like there was some political back and forth that was
Yeah.
happening. Like I said, I served in FEMA. I'm glad I was part of FEMA. I was on the national strike team. National IMAT West is what they call it there at the time, and I deployed out to very political incidents. I've
Yep.
also deployed very, very fast to some incidents that were not very big at all, in terms of like the general population scope. And this one, it seems like they didn't do that. And eventually, FEMA sent out like a regional IMAT, and I was like, "Ooh, really? Like that was like the best you got?" But maybe I don't know all the details, and I'm sure none of us really do
Yeah.
besides closed doors. From your perspective, uh, is there things to appropriately criticize, or do you think the media is blowing this out of proportion?
Well, certainly, after the fact, criticism is always easier. But let me
Yeah.
ask you this: you work for FEMA. How many shovels do you guys have, or bulldozers, or excavators, or how many of the absorbent pads do you guys keep warehoused?
Yeah, what I said,
You know
what
what I
I would
mean?
direct that to is with the logistics team out there, they would be able to identify those resources, those
Yeah.
contractors, a lot faster than somebody local who doesn't even know what a manifest is. You know?
Yeah, that's my point. Is if you go to fbo.gov and look up, FEMA Region 10 Rapid Response Contract, you're going
Hmm.
to get a list of some of the best contractors in the world, like Ceres or ECC Environmental. These are
Hmm.
the same contractors that Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific are using. So
Hmm.
the phone is already rung, and companies like Ceres are already on their way. NRC is, the National Response Corporation, not the agency,
Hmm.
are
Oh,
already
interesting.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
already on their way. I mean, what FEMA being a management agency, one of the problems with federalizing an incident is if you take command and control of an incident, now you're directing actions. Um, who's writing these checks? By federalizing, are you spending Norfolk Southern's money, or are you spending federal money that's allocated on contract AG-104H, on and on?
Hmm.
You know, at some point, the taxpayers want their money back because the responsible party is clearly identified in 49 CFR as the responsible party.
Hmm.
So I think when it comes to companies, like if they're large enough to take care of the incident and they are making forward progress, I think it's no problem in having FEMA on site watching them, making sure they're doing what they say they're doing, making sure that what can be done is being done. You know the difference when you get on an incident, whether it's like, man, this is a complete S show,
Yep.
or you show
Wow,
up,
thank you for doing that for this.
I
You.
hear you.
Yeah. Good man.
Yeah, so I've shown up in incidents where it's a complete crap show, and it's like,
Yep.
how are you guys not already dead? And I've shown up in incidents where you just seamlessly integrate and things are flowing as smoothly as they possibly can.
It's
You,
so painful when that happens. You're
Mhm.
like, you don't even. It's hard to comprehend the level of incompetency, and it's always for the dumbest reasons. It's like not
Absolutely,
even like it's not even for the reasons you'd think it is. Of like, oh, they're not trained or this. It's like,
yeah,
oh no, like you were pissed about something like
yep,
juvenile. Like, yeah, it's
yep. I've seen turf wars between agencies to hold up an incident, their
yes, I have
response.
too. Yes,
Yep, I've
turf
seen
wars are real, and they're real right now, big time. Yeah.
yeah. And a war is won on the stomachs of men. I kind of paraphrase that, as you know. But
Mm.
logistics is key to doing anything. I've seen some logistics officers stopped by just the smallest of tissue paper barriers. Well, I called the trucking company. They don't have any available to Monday. It's like, well, who else have you called? You know,
Yeah.
we have Google. There must be, how many tens of thousands of tractor trailers and operators wanting to jump on a load.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do
let's
you
move
think
this
that
stuff.
Do you think that's what's been happening here a little bit, or do you
You,
think it's
I don't think so. I think
mm,
I've seen a lot of stuff in motion, a lot of equipment moving. So I think that going back to your original question, could they federalize it? Certainly, but that comes back to who's paying the bills, who's directing operations.
yeah.
Because after things settle down, Norfolk Southern, the lawyers are going to get involved. Norfolk Southern's going to want to minimize their losses, damages, liability. Maybe the feds did overspend. Maybe they did do it the wrong way. Maybe they increased costs exponentially for no reason by just doing it inefficiently.
Mm.
That's an argument they're going to make, and that's going to take years to settle in court. The last suit for the Exxon Valdez spill was settled in 2016 or 17, I think.
Didn't that happen in the 80s?
Yeah, 88 or 89. I think
Oh my
89.
gosh,
Yeah,
89. And then is BP oil the 2010 incident? Is that still in court?
I it
I
might
thought
be,
there
but
was a federal.
not nearly as much because I know that BP got ahead of this. They got ahead of the game.
Yeah, they did do a settlement. I recall at the time
Yeah,
thinking, what happened there? Because it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it should have been.
yeah,
It's hard not to become emotional about this stuff. You see
yeah.
the
This is
people
real people.
impacted. Yeah, and as a guy who has gone out to a lot of this stuff, it's like
Hmm.
it does make you wonder. Like you see the actions from afar, and it's like, wait, FEMA did what, or the
Yeah,
state did what? Like
yeah,
the what's happening at the local level. And I like understanding. And so again, thank you so much for coming on because you're adding such like a cool head here. It's like this is what's really happening here. One of the things that people always forget, and this is for our audience, is there is the ideal situation as you called out, and then
sure.
there's the reality, and the reality is often mixed, and it's usually not good, better, or best, but it's bad or worse.
Yeah,
And it definitely sounds like obviously this was a bad incident. Not sounds like we know it was a bad incident, but it sounds like it could have been a lot worse too. If something had gone boom, if there's that explosion that happened
yeah,
and we lost responders, this would have been so much worse in so many other ways. And I'm not giving any credit to the train lines, and I'm definitely not going to give any credit to that federalization, that perspective, because I do have my own personal criticisms,
yeah,
and
yeah,
I'll keep that to myself. However, this sounds like a lot of logical steps were also taken from responsible parties, and we have to do. I mean, your call out of like who's ever responsible is paying for the stuff. Somebody has to pay for it,
yeah,
and it's better that the trains pay for it if they cause the disaster. However, they are going to do bare minimum. Anybody would try to see how they could mitigate
exactly.
their losses, as unfortunate as that might be. So. Eric, thank you again so much for your time. For like this last little call out here for just a second, do you have any final thoughts, considerations, ideas for how many thousands people listen to this podcast? Your thoughts that can help them as they move forward.
I think the best thing to do in this situation is to give it a little more time. I mean, this incident is still ongoing.
Mm,
Um, Wait for some final after action review to get done, and then the real criticism can start as far as what the trains could have couldn't done. I can say that 149 cars is a big train. 152 once you add the engines in.
yeah.
Colleague asked me why not they break this up into smaller trains? That way it's got smaller events. Like, well, you just have more evolutions. You took
Mm.
instead of 150 cars in one train, now you got 5 trains of 30 cars. You just got that much more traffic to deal with. So
Yeah, good point. More places
there's
for something to happen. Hey,
absolutely,
this is actually kind of random. Right at the very end here,
yep,
the tracks. You see
yeah,
these videos of the trains like moving, like
yeah.
they're at a club at night. You know what I mean? Um, is that justified from what you see in rail lines? Are the rail lines really that bad across the U.S., or is it time to update, or are they probably fine?
There's some places that the tracks literally look just like a couple of lines of spaghetti on the ground, up
Oh
and
my
down, up and
gosh!
down.
Yeah,
I've seen some. I'll send you a link to a YouTube video. I don't know if you can put the link up,
yeah.
but the tracks are. It's an offshoot. It's a siding they call it that goes to a factory that's rarely ever used. They get one train a year of a dozen cars of lumber. They would never take a train down a track like that if it had any type of chemicals, hazardous materials. In
Mm,
this case, it's just lumber. It's in the Puyallup, Washington area, but the tracks are so old, so ill-maintained that they have an engine dedicated to it. That's just a piece of crap. That
mm,
if it does come off the tracks, it's easy to fix. If the cars go off the track, okay, it's lumber. It's we just spent all afternoon picking it up with our front end loaders.
Mm.
But generally, the best tracks are in the desert where it's nice and flat and straight. It's when you get around, where there's a lot of people, congestion, and trains that the tracks need more maintenance. That's where
I
it
think
gets neglected.
so. That's a great ending call out there. It's like they are aware of what's on the tracks. They
Yep.
are aware that what should go on the track, what shouldn't.
Yep.
Again, Eric, thank you so much. You know, your company. Do you want to do a really pitch for your company on the way out here?
I'm pretty solid. This is your show, John, so I appreciate it.
Well, if anybody wants to look up Eric's company, I'll put it in the show links. Eric is a world-renowned, at least at my perspective, expert on hazmat and hazmat responses, especially from a fire perspective. Every time he comes on here, it is knockout for information and knowledge. We always get really good comments. If you got something out of this episode, and you should have, you really should let us know in the comment sections on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, wherever, and say, hey, like I've been looking at this. This makes me think about manifest. This makes me think about the planning process. This makes me think about evacuations and coordinating with, incident commanders from fire and doing all the things that you can do to coordinate a better response, recovery, and also the mitigation side of it too. Really, every episode we ask for that 5-star rating and subscribe, but it does mean a lot. It means a lot to us. It means a lot to our guests. And quite frankly, when you learn something from this podcast, it helps you move forward. So please like, subscribe, and comment, and we'll see you for the next one.